Hey, everybody. Welcome to Show and Tell, a live stream where the tbD team shows and tells you about the latest, greatest open source project or concept at tbD, because we love being open about what we're working on. So during the show, whether you're on LinkedIn, Twitch, YouTube, or our Discord, you can drop questions in the chat and we will answer them in the second half of our show. I am your host and moderator, Tanya. And joining us as our speaker for the day is Chris. So
Hey,
feel free
Tanya.
to feel free to quickly introduce yourself and what your topic is about.
Yes, absolutely. So again, my name is Chris. I've been a developer advocate here at tbD for a little over a year now. I started off working on some of our Web 5 tech. And then since late last year, I've been focused on tbDEX. So one of my big efforts was writing a lot of the documentation that you see and guides available on PFIs, participating financial institutions, which is exactly what we're going to be talking about today. So I know the title, we're talking about a liquidity node on tbDEX, and a liquidity node and a PFI participating financial institution are going to be one and the same for the purposes of this talk. So we're going to jump into that. We have an example code base that we've actually deployed as of recently. So we're going to be jumping into that. And my goal at the end of this talk is that number one, you'll know how to and feel comfortable actually implementing a PFI. And number two, and maybe this is a little bit of a dream, but that you would actually think it's pretty easy. But maybe that's a little ambitious. We'll see.
Awesome. Great. I'm excited to get started. But before that, quick icebreaker for everybody in the chat. Where is everybody in chat tuning in from? I'll go first and to say I am from Queens, New York.
Yeah, and Queens, New York, not far from where I grew up. I'm calling in from Dallas, Texas.
Oh, yeah. That's
Yeah.
awesome. I didn't realize you didn't grow far from here.
Yeah. So I grew up in Manhattan, but was in Queens all the time, have family there. So
Wow.
yeah.
That's awesome. Give a moment for folks to chat. Boston, nice. I see somebody from our Discord in Brazil, nice. Okay, well, while we let that start rolling, how about we just go ahead and get started?
Perfect.
Nigeria, Benin, nice. Okay.
Super cool.
All right, I'm just going to add your screen to get the show started.
Perfect. Silicon Valley, Congo, DRC.
Awesome.
That is awesome. Okay. So like I said, today we're going to be jumping into how to actually build a liquidity node on tbDEX. We're going to start off, we're going to just do a really quick overview of tbDEX, of liquidity nodes, who like exists on the network, a few key concepts, and then we're actually going to just dive into code. And this isn't just code that is theoretical. It's not just code that exists in a vacuum. It's actually code that we have deployed and running. And at the end of this, if you guys want to check that out, I'll let you know where to go. So the first thing, just to recap for those who are new here, is that the tbDEX ecosystem comprises of three main actors. We have wallets, PFIs, or participating financial institutions, and verifiable credential issuers. So today we're going to be talking about PFIs. Very quickly, wallets you could think of as just your customers. A wallet is like an account that's basically going to be interfacing with your PFI, with your liquidity node. And VC issuers or verifiable credential issuers, they're going to be providing trust, and they're going to be providing verification since you are dealing with financial transactions that you're okay to go on this. So PFIs are participating financial institutions that are going to offer liquidity on this network. They're going to make themselves known to wallet applications, and the way that those transactions will be facilitated in terms of trust are with those issuers. Today, we're going to be focusing on the code for PFIs. There's actually a little bit of issuer code in the example here for you to be able to test your own. We're not going to be going into wallet code today. So to get a brief overview of what an actual exchange looks like, and just to clarify, an exchange here is an exchange between a wallet and a PFI. I know that sometimes, and I know when I first started this, I would hear the word exchange and I'd think to myself, oh, exchange, we're talking about like a financial exchange, right? Like New York Stock Exchange. No, I think that's really important. An exchange is basically the... So number one, if there's a wallet out there, they say, I'm in search of financial services. How the heck are they going to do this? Well, they're going to submit a request for quote. And they're going to submit a request for quote on some financial service. And that financial service that you or any other PFI is going to be offering is called an offering. Very simple. That offering is a data type that's going to describe the transaction that will happen. We'll get a little bit more into that later. And then next, once the wallet has submitted that RFQ, the request for quote, you're going to actually send them a quote back. You're going to say, okay, this is what you would like. I have processed your request. I see that you have the credentials that are required. I see that everything checks out. Here's the quote back. Do with it as you will. And then if the wallet holder has decided, they've said, yeah, I would love to move forward with this, they're going to go ahead and place an order. Because once you've given them a quote, that gives them the authorization to actually go ahead and place an order. And then once that order has been placed with you as the PFI, you're going to go forward and you're going to actually process that order, right? Now, this is where we actually off-ramp from tbDEX and we go into whatever your method of financial fulfillment is. That could be, you're a bank and you're able to process ACH. It may be that you're going to use Stripe or someone else to process a credit card or Cash App, whoever it is. You're going to process and fulfill that order in the background. As that's happening, you're going to provide order status updates. There is no protocol in terms of what you have to do. It's just a message option in the context of your exchange. And then once that order has been completed, you're going to go ahead, you're going to send a close message, and the exchange has been finished. So in order for your PFI or your liquidity node to actually be able to execute those 5 stages of an exchange, you're going to need 3 main things. The first is you're going to need an API server, and that is the problem that the tbDEX SDK is addressing. So an API server is going to be a DID addressable server that's running the tbDEX SDK that accepts inbound tbDEX protocol requests. I'm not going to go too much into DIDs right now, but I'd be happy to answer any questions about that. Basically, the tbDEX SDK, when it is accepting messages or when it's sending messages, there's 2 sides to it. There's the tbDEX client and tbDEX server. When a client is using the SDK to send messages, they're not going to send it to a URL endpoint. They're actually going to send it to a DID. And that means that you're going to need to create a DID that is registered as a PFI to be able to accept that. So you have your API server. The next thing you're going to need is a database to actually store the offerings that we talked about and the exchanges that we've been discussing. Pretty straightforward, and you can have whatever database technology you want. And then lastly, you need a mechanism of fulfillment, right? It's awesome that we want to broadcast our offerings, that we want to put that out there, that we want to make that available and so democratized. We actually have to hold up on that promise, and we actually need to fulfill the order. That is not something that the tbDEX SDK actually handles. The tbDEX SDK is actually handling matching of transactions. So if I were to give you a checklist, if you were going to go and do this yourself, I would tell you that there are 5 main steps that you need to execute in order to actually carry this out. The first is that you need to create a DID with a PFI service endpoint. That DID is going to live in this PFI API server, and that is how people are going to get to you. The next thing you're going to do once you've actually stood this up is you're going to need to configure your API routes using the tbDEX SDK. We're going to get into more of this in a minute. The tbDEX SDK effectively creates an express server and provides a lot of convenience around that express server to automatically, or sort of like in a new orientation, handle all of the inbound requests that you need to successfully implement a PFI. Once you've done those 2 things, you're going to go ahead and create and connect your database. And the nice thing is tbDEX is not very strict on what you actually need to have running on that database, just that you need to store the data. And more than anything, you need to be able to fulfill your promises. And another way of saying that is that when you need to return data, you need to return it in the data that it is expected. I saw a question, is the server decentralized? It does not have to be. It can be, absolutely. There are no requirements on that. So for example, in the what we're going to talk about today, there's a Postgres example, which is absolutely not decentralized. But you'll see when we get into the code that you could swap that database provider out for whatever you'd please, and you could use a decentralized solution. Then the next thing you're going to do is, okay, you have this database, you have this server, you need offerings for wallets to actually be able to consume and to find you. We're not going to go into offering design today. We do have some documentation on that. But you do need offerings to actually kind of get hit up for a request. And then lastly, you're going to need a fulfillment mechanism to connect to the API to actually be able to fulfill these orders. Okay, it's enough talk about the theory. We're going to jump into the code, and I'm going to show you kind of the key files that you would need to implement. You're going to see it's really not that much, and that's not to trivialize it. It's just to say that there are a few key files where you're going to do most of your work. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my screen. Okay. Perfect. So today, what we're looking at is a repository available on GitHub to any of you who would like to play around with it. It's our tbDEX PFI exemplar, and it is exactly what it sounds like. It is an example implementation of a PFI minus fulfillment. We're not doing fulfillment here, but it does everything else, and it even has a little issuer baked into it. So we're going to go through some of the main files here. Again, if you want to check this out or pull this yourselves, you're absolutely able to. I'll scroll down here to just let you know that there is a little bit of setup required for this, including setting up the Postgres database, populating it with some dummy data. It is well documented and fairly straightforward here, but I want to let you know to do that. Another thing that we'll get to at the end, there actually are Docker files here if you would like to take a look to actually deploy this. We have this deployed today, and I can show you at the end of this as well. We have it deployed. You can pull offerings from there. Again, it will not actually do fulfillment. But if you want to see what a code base looks like for an application that is actually deployable, you've got it right here. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to talk about what does it look like to actually create this did that we talked about, right? We need to check off step one. So I'll show you what the code looks like right here from lines 16 to 24. You'll see code like this all over our documentation, but it's worth repeating actually in the context of our exemplar here. In this case, we're just using the did.dht method to create a PFI did. Something that's really important to call out is that we need to make sure that we're actually identifying this as a PFI, as you'll see on lines 20 and 21. And the other thing is that we're specifying a service endpoint. What that service endpoint is it's a URL. You can see the reference over here on the right-hand side. It's a URL at which other applications that are trying to address your PFI will be able to reach you. So you can see that it's defaulted to just localhost, but when this actually gets deployed, that is the URL, the DNS that you want to occupy.
Quick thing, could you just zoom in a little bit?
Absolutely.
So we can see. There you go.
Is that better right there?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I'll center that again and just show you. So again, this service endpoint, that is the URL. So sometimes thinking of this in did speak can be a little bit more abstract. So let's just say that that service endpoint is the URL. It is very important that when you're setting up your PFI, that you take this step, that you make sure that you specify the service endpoint. I also just want to call out, there are a lot of did methods, and there are a lot of ways to create dids. This is not the one size fits all, but you will have to make sure to specify the service endpoint. Okay. I also want to say that if you look here and do as I say, not as I do here, if there happens to be a file, that's what these lines are saying. If there happens to be a file with which we can import the did, we will. This is not a great security practice. And I will say that if you would like your did to be loadable, do not write it in a text file. We're doing that because this is an open, accessible way for you or I to try out a PFI. But we do offer Key Vault support as part of the Web5 SDK, which is where this did-DHT method lives and other did methods. And so please, if you are actually deploying this, do not write this to a text file. Use a Key Vault or a key manager solution in order to be able to remotely store your private keys for your DID. That's very, very important. So we've gone ahead. We have created our DID. We've talked a little bit about best practices and the requirements for creating a DID for your PFI. Right now, you'll see in here, I'll just let you know, this lives in the utils file. That can truly live wherever you'd like it to. This will just run on the startup of the service. Now, getting to the main service and step 2 on our checklist, we have our main.ts file here. By the way, this is all running in the JavaScript TypeScript SDK for tbDEX as well as Web5. So there's a lot of setup up here that I am going to actually skip over for right now. I want to bring your attention to a few key lines right here. And it's line 60, and I'm going to go here down to 79. So I have created my NPM project. Again, we're talking in the JS context here. I said, all right, I've got this. I created a little snippet to create my DID. I know exactly how to create my DID. Time to set it up. And the good news is that if you've ever worked with Express or something similar, this is exactly like that. We are just going to initialize a few classes. We are going to set up some routes, and we're good to go. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create this tbDEX server instance. And I know I mentioned before that under the hood of the HTTP server is Express. That is taking care of your routing. What's so nice about the SDK that we have here is that it is going to abstract away the routing. It extracts away how like resolution is happening. All you have to do is this very simple initialization, right? And there's more information on this in the documentation, but I want to touch on this briefly. You'll see that the tbDEX HTTP server, when that's initialized and it's setting up all of your routing for handling the exchanges that we talked about earlier, you'll see that there are 3 key and maybe unfamiliar inputs to that. There's the exchanges, offerings, and balances API. So I want to touch briefly on what those are. The exchanges API is a class that's designed to interface with your data store for exchanges. Your offerings API is a class designed to interface with your offerings data, and balances is for balances. You know, you haven't heard that word yet. That's just the balance that you as the PFI or liquidity node are holding on behalf of your customers. These exchanges and offerings API, those classes are defined by the tbDEX SDK, and they have very specific method signatures that are designed to make this easier. I'm going to get into more of those in a minute. So, great. I went ahead. I have set up my server. You said, you're probably thinking to yourself, Chris, you said that this handles a lot. What is it handling and what do I have to do? Great question. I'd love to tell you. So the first thing that we're going to do, and really the only thing that we're going to do, is we're going to set up 3 key routes. So if you remember that there are the 5 stages or 5 steps in an exchange, there is RFQ, quote, order, order status, and close. 3 of those need to be handled by you as a liquidity node. So the first here is this method. It's called onCreateExchange. An exchange, as we've talked about, is sort of the messaging between yourself as a PFI and a wallet. And so when a wallet creates an RFQ, a request for quote, that creates an exchange along with it. So when you see this onCreateExchange method, what you can really think of this as is an RFQ has been submitted to me. And you'll see that each one of these 3 is handled by the exchange's repository. Now this add message, that is a method that we wrote into, meaning custom. That is not part of the class signature for the exchange's repository. We wrote that in. It's a convenience method. But if you think about each of these 3, so on create exchange, that's what happens when you get an RFQ. On submit order, it's exactly as it sounds. An order has been submitted by a wallet. And then the last one, on submit close, a wallet has tried to submit a close. on each of those 3 steps, that's all exchange data, right? That's all data related to your exchange. It doesn't have to do with offerings, and those don't explicitly have to do with balances, although they may leverage balance data. Okay, so all of those will be handled within the exchange's repository class, and that class will have direct access to whatever it is that you choose to use to store your exchange data. All right, now we'll circle back to these in a second. I want to highlight another method that I wrote here. I actually just added this the other day into this code example, and I think that you might find this useful. So you'll see here, I previously called HTTP API and then onSubmit close or onSubmit order. I'm calling a method that belongs to that class, and that is the tbDEX HTTP server class. I have one here where I actually access to the property, the API property, and then you can see that I'm writing a post method in here. And if you think, Chris, that looks just like an express call, that's because it is exactly an express call. That API property actually is the express server that is within the HTTP API. So in this case, and I know I mentioned this earlier, but we do have an issuer built into this PFI because we want to just make that as easy as possible. So I actually exposed a route here, and you can see that it was very easy for me to be able to add any API endpoints that I'd like to that are not tbDEX specific or even just PFI specific. And then down here, I can go ahead and just start that server up. Okay, so let's see. So really quickly, what I'd like to do is I'd like to show you a little bit more about what's actually going on under the hood of exchanges, offerings, and balances. But you can see that in just a few lines here, right, in the course of exactly 20 lines, we were able to create a server. We were able to set up the routing for handling any of our incoming messages. And we even added a bonus route too. So the first thing that I'm going to be showing you is, see, we got a question earlier. We're building a platform facilitating investments and remittances in Africa. Can tbDEX be used on an iOS app? Yes, it can be. So tbDEX does cover 3 actors. It covers wallets, it covers PFIs, and it covers issuers. So we do have a Swift SDK, which you would be able to run on iOS. However, if you're trying to run like a server, which is what effectively a PFI is, that's not really a candidate to run on your iOS app necessarily. So we don't have the PFI functionality in the SDK there. I hope that answers your question. And if not, please do clarify. I'd love to help with that. Okay. Okay. So this is the exchange repository class. So the tbDEX protocol that it's implementing is the exchanges API. Now, I know I mentioned earlier that the tbDEX SDK kind of abstracts away a lot of what you would normally have to do yourself, in addition to providing the protocol classes and convenience methods. And the tbDEX SDK also has some opinions about how we should actually go about that. So in this exchanges API, you'll see that there is, first of all, this method, it's get exchanges, which is going to get all the exchanges. That's get exchanges. That will get exchanges on a filter. We have a get all exchanges or to get a specific exchange. Now, what's nice about the tbDEX SDK is that when I go ahead and implement and actually fill out these methods, yes, I can use them myself. And also, the SDK will automatically route certain incoming requests to those functions. And I'll actually show you a very clear example of what that looks like on the offerings one. So the offerings repository here has this get offering or get offerings method. And actually at the end of today, I'll show you how this is automatically wired. This get offerings method here is actually wired up via the SDK to the /offerings API endpoint. So without doing anything other than filling out this method, this get offerings method, my PFI will automatically be able to return to anyone who is requesting all the offerings that I have.
Really quick, could you re-answer this question? There are just some connectivity issues with Twitch, and they may
Oh,
not
yeah,
have been able to hear.
no problem. So the short answer for can tbDEX be used on an iOS app is yes. The long answer is not in all use case scenarios. So tbDEX includes 3 actors. It includes PFIs, wallets, and issuers. If you would like to be a wallet on the tbDEX network, you can absolutely build using our Swift SDK. If you'd like to be building a PFI, which is what we're demonstrating code for in JavaScript here today, you would not be able to do that because the Swift SDK does not support those methods. Okay. Let's see. So we've talked about the exchanges repository. We've talked about the offerings repository. We can see that there are some of these methods that are built in here. So you can use them yourself. And also the SDK will automatically route some incoming requests to those methods. The example that we've shown here is the get offerings method, where a wallet will be able to call this method and they'll be able to see all of the offerings. Okay. Now, if you notice here, this get offerings, it's got to return something, right? So that takes us to step number 3 from our big PFI checklist at the start, which is we need a database. In the case here, you'll see that we're just using Postgres. You can use whatever you like. I know there was a question earlier that we started talking about where we mentioned how, yeah, you could use a decentralized database, you can use a centralized one, whatever method of storage makes you happy and suits your needs and fits your requirements, you are absolutely free to use and you should use. All that matters is that, I mean, really, that you can fulfill, pun not intended, you can fulfill this promise right here, right? If someone is asking, I would like to get all of the offerings that you have, you need to be able to return to them the offerings that you have. Now, the most straightforward way is to just have a database where you have an offerings table that stores the offerings. You just pull, like we're doing here, and you return them. Now, if there's another way that you'd like to do it, you're absolutely welcome. Again, as long as you fulfill this promise and you have a database technology and schema that allows you to do that, then by all means, go ahead with that. Okay, so we've gone ahead to go back for a second here. We went ahead, we created our server. We went ahead and registered these callbacks. I'll show you over here what this add message is doing, by the way. So this is a function. This is not part of the exchange repository signature that comes with tbDEX. But you'll see that all we're doing is it's effectively an insert convenience method. In case you were looking at this and wondering, Chris, what is add message doing? That's all it's doing. It is just an add. And you can see here, it's jumping around on me. You can see here that this is where some actual processing happens, and we will come back to that. I want to briefly touch on to our step 4 before we come back to that, because step 4 is offering, step 5 will be fulfillment. So we have some great documentation here to get you started on actually creating offerings. I won't go through this right now. It is available on our developer site. You can see it over here under tbDEX, PFIs, and creating offerings. Obviously, the code itself is not going to show you the design process behind an offering, but you have some documentation here to get you going. Under the actual offering itself, there's a description, and you can see all usual object right here being created in JavaScript. So at a high level, you have something called a pay-in and a payout, right? That's what we can boil our transaction down to. What is somebody going to pay in and what are they going to get out? And then under each of those is what's the currency and what's the actual method. So for example, let's say I would like to pay in, right? So we see here selling BTC for USD. So my pay in, I'm paying in with USD here, right? How could I actually pay in? The methods? Well, I could use a debit card. I might be able to use ACH. I might be able to use Cash App. And then what's the payout in? It could be, BTC in this case, and you would provide the information for the actual wallet address that you see down here. So, the protocol here is just specifying a way of sort of detailing what this transaction actually means. I think at a high level, just think about it in terms of what's my pay-in, what's my payout, what are my currencies for each of those, and what are the methods that I am supporting for each of those. Now, that's pretty straightforward. The next thing that you need to know when you're creating your offerings is, what do I actually need to know about this person as a PFI in order to be able to allow this transaction to continue? Now, I want to specify here that what I'm talking about when I'm saying what do I actually need to allow this to continue, there's two different things. One is the actual mechanics of what do I need to know, which you can see described on the screen here. It's in this case giving or requesting information for a debit card, right? That's the mechanical way of what do I need to actually execute this transaction. But there's also a trust aspect too. Is this person really the name associated in this case with the debit card? Is this person sanctioned in any way, right? Am I legally allowed to facilitate this transaction? Yes or no? So depending on where you're at, there may be different requirements you have from a legal standpoint, compliance, and just from how you may choose to run your business. And so because of that, you will want proof of whatever that requirement is, separate from the debit card, the actual mechanism by which this transaction is going to happen, and verifiable credentials are going to solve that problem for you. So you will specify in the offering what verifiable credentials you'll actually need in order for you to be able to move ahead with this transaction. And I just want to jump back over here for a second. So you'll see, now this is not actually performing any checks, excuse me. But this post method that I add, the get VC, that's available on our deployed PFI, what this is doing is this is actually issuing a verifiable credential. We're calling this a sanctions one. It's just assuming that whoever it is that's requesting this is legitimate, that they are not on a sanctions list. But if you are an issuer who is issuing credentials, or if there is an issuer who is issuing credentials to allow people to transact with certain offerings that you as a PFI are offering, then you will want to make sure, you want to understand what are the requirements to get that credential, and that should allow your offering to go through. Okay, now let's see. So that will be specified in your actual offering. If you'd like to learn more about credentials as well, under VCs here, we have a lot of fantastic documentation put together by our team that will help you understand how do I actually, if you yourself want to build that credential, you are absolutely welcome to. If you want to figure out how to evaluate credentials that somebody else may have created, this will also give you the understanding that you need to perform that task. Okay. And then finally, step number 5, after you've built all of this, is going to be actually fulfilling this order. Now, when you get these messages and you're putting them into your database, under this like add message function that we have here, you'll see that we're actually checking, well, what is the kind of message? I want to understand kind of what's going on here. What actions do I need to take? So in the inbound, when you're actually getting these messages, you can perform some things just within the context of your tbDEX SDK app. Now, once an order has actually gone through and you have, you put your offering out there, that you got the request for quote, you sent the quote back right after you verified the credentials that you needed to. They went ahead and placed an order with you. It's now on you to fulfill that order according to the contract that you signed with this person. I want to stress here that this is where the tbDEX SDK ends and your either pre-existing or newly built fulfillment service comes in. And when I say fulfillment service, what I'm saying is that, for example, if you created an offering where, like we saw earlier, you've agreed to exchange Bitcoin for US dollar, now that you have put that offering out there, that someone has accepted it, and you have an order in place, you need to actually be able to execute that transaction. That is not something that the tbDEX SDK is concerned with. that is going to be separate. Now, you can absolutely make all of that take place within the exact same service here. You may want to decouple that and have your own service that handles fulfillment. But either way, that is not something that is going to be in the scope of PFI. That's something in the scope of fulfillment, and that is separate. Okay. So that takes us to the end of our code. So with that, there are a few different things that I can do from here. Number one, we can take a second to answer any questions that folks might have about the code itself and the files that I've shown. That's number one. We also can talk about how this was actually deployed, which if you'd like to check out the Docker file and Docker Compose, I can show you a little bit more of that. And lastly, we can actually ping a live PFI together just using Postman. So we have a few different options, but I'll give everybody a second to see if there are any questions from the code thus far.
Now, I am jumping in to say I am aware of some connection issues with the stream to Twitch here and there. Hopefully, everybody hears us okay. You can also tune in on our YouTube as well. I'm definitely biased to the last option. That sounds really cool, but now is the time to ask any questions you may have so far. If not, that is cool too.
While people get typing, I can go ahead and I'll pull up Postman, and we can go ahead and see what this actually looks like together.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, this is going to look very tiny, so I'm going to try and zoom this in for everyone. So we all see this. Okay, let's see. If I know someone with liquidity, how can I safely leverage that? Can you explain a little bit more by what you mean with that question? If you know someone with liquidity, meaning if you have like a friend, meaning like a non-PFI that you'd like to leverage, and in what ways would you want to be like leveraging that?
You can just type your follow-up for clarification. We'll be happy to answer.
Yeah. Okay. While I wait for that quickly. So in Postman here, so this endpoint right here, pfi-exemplar.tbdev.org, that's where we have an actual deployed PFI based on the code, and it's actually exactly the code that you saw, just with a different configuration. And we are working, and I'm working on actually documenting that. We're going to be working on putting more offerings in there and actually making that a testing asset to all of you, which is very exciting and should be very helpful. And even in the process of getting that up, we have come up with a lot more ideas for developer tools, whether you are a wallet developer or a PFI developer. But you can see I can go ahead and send a request to this offerings endpoint. And again, this is running the exact same code that we were just going through earlier. And you can see that it went ahead and we have a live did here. We have an offering, and we have our fake offering as expected. And it's going ahead and specify the required payment details. And then I know that we didn't see an example of this earlier, but it actually shows the required claims. Required claims is another way of saying what verifiable credentials do we need. What are the names? So we can see that it needs to be a sanctioned credential. And we need to see who actually issued the sanctioned credential. It needs to be signed by the correct party. So we can go ahead and see that we've got that up there. There's no authorization or anything required. So if you wanted to in your own Postman or your tool of choice wanted to go ahead and hit this URL, you'd absolutely be able to.
Awesome. Also, Torben added a follow-up to their question. There are many great PFIs, but many need strategic partnerships to add to their liquidity pools, as they may not have enough capital.
Mm-hmm. So, I see. I think I'm trying to scope this within as a tbDEX problem. So
Yeah.
tbDEX is designed to facilitate the matching between liquidity providers and liquidity seekers. I think the problem that you're describing is liquidity providers with liquidity providers to increase their liquidity pool, which is a little bit of a different problem. I suppose that, if you're a PFI, you have a DID, which means that you are able to communicate with other DIDs, right? A PFI could have a wallet, for example. We just might not think of that, right? We think of, a person has a wallet, right? But a PFI, which is an institution, right, can have a wallet too. Theoretically, other PFIs could put offerings out to say, hey, we're looking to PFIs, and then other PFIs could go, they could find that offering, they could request quotes on that, and they could actually pool liquidity between other PFIs together, theoretically. That's how you would sort of leverage the tbDEX network.
Great answer to a very unique question. And thank you for asking, Torben. Another earlier question I noticed is just a general one from Paula saying, any contact info for partnerships? I have many projects that would love to switch to this and in other areas as well. Great tools.
Yeah. Tania, do we have a good email for folks to jump into there? Or do you have a link that you'd want to paste in the chat?
Yeah, I think in general, the best immediate way to get in contact with any of us is through our Discord. So you can join that anytime at discord.gg/tbd. And for any immediate partnership questions or general questions that you have for our teammates directly, we'll be able to answer them in there directly. So that's discord.gg/tbd.
Yeah. And yeah, Torben, I started getting a little choppy there, but just to reiterate, yeah, absolutely. Right now we think of if you're a provider that you are putting an offering out there. So for example, you're going to do currency exchange, or you may offer some type of loan through tbDEX. But you can also basically be saying, I will go out and I will say, I'm looking to collect liquidity to pool together into my own pool to then be able to profit off of that as a PFI. And you would just say, well, the verifiable credential in that case that you would need to provide to be eligible for that offering is that you need to prove that you're PFI.
Great. Any other questions, anybody in the audience? Feel free to ask. If you don't have questions, that is fine. Thank you, Torben. I don't see any others at the moment. Is there anything else you wanted to share in the meantime or touch on?
No, I think we covered it. I think, just to review everything that we talked about and making sure that, everybody who's listening today gets all the resources that they need. We talked about the kind of 5 main steps of what you're going to do if you're going to go ahead and deploy your own PFI. We talked about how to actually create a DID with a PFI service endpoint. Thank you, Tania. We talked about how to configure those API routes. I know we said create and connect your database, but you can really use any database technology that makes you happy and that suits your needs. We went a little bit into offerings and how to actually get those set up. And then lastly, we talked about fulfillment. Now, if you're looking over all of these, really the only tbDEX SDK specific task is number 2. Number 1, if you're creating a DID, it's a very short code snippet with a very easy import and a very easy npm install if you're a JavaScript developer like we were showing off today. Number 2 is the only tbDEX specific piece, in terms of the SDK, and that was 20 lines of code, which is fantastic. Databases are something that I think a lot of us have already set up and provisioned before. In terms of offerings, we have great guides, and we have great guides for all of this, but especially for offerings on our developer site. And then when it comes to fulfillment, if you are currently a participating financial institution or a liquidity provider, you probably have this already. And if not, there are a lot of great SDKs out there to help you build that functionality alongside what the SDK is doing. So you have all of that. If you'd like to see an example of all of this come together into one app, we have that tbDEX PFI exemplar on our GitHub, which you can check out at that link right there. And if you'd like to actually ping it and test against it, and we're continuing to update that, and I'm personally working on developer guidance for that to help all of you develop specifically wallet apps, but also to use it as a live PFI implementation, you can do so at a link. It is let me pull that up one more time. It is pfiexemplar.tbddev.org. And you can use all of the like existing tbDEX SDK routes to ping it.
Say that one more time.
It is pfiexemplar.tbddev.org. That's where it lives at. And I will say that if anybody has a request for, so that's kind of our first one. We have the ability to spin up as many as needed. And if anyone has testing that they're really interested in with new offerings or different functionality, we're able to spin those up. So if there are test cases that you are interested in, please hop in our Discord, ask us about that. We would love to build out that functionality for you. This is going to be really helpful when you're testing, whether you're building a wallet or if you just want to see what a deployed PFI looks like.
All right. Yeah. Before we sign off here, just want to let everybody know, thank you so much for tuning in today. And as Chris mentioned, you can join our Discord either to ask any follow-up questions, for any guidance along the way with this PFI checklist, or really chat with us about anything, along with, like someone mentioned in the chat earlier, how we can get in touch for potential partnerships with us. So yeah, all right. So signing off here, everybody. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and we will see you next time. Bye.